Providence Operative Riftik's perspective. Our objective was simple: infiltrate the decadent Golden Nest and there pass judgment upon the heretic leader. Years of planning and preparation, training and drills without end, all of it was for this day alone. Of all the many trials placed before my unit, the worst of them had to be that dreaded surgery, removing the indicators of our divine heritage to blend us in with the blaspheming masses of this cursed nation. Without the glorious markings of our gods, we had no longer a place within the mortal realm. Following this mission, each of us was to dispose of themselves using hidden capsules of concentrated xylitol, one of the deadliest natural poisons on Arquisa. However, with the passing of our mortal vessels, my unit's place in paradise was assured. Speaking, however, of poisons, transporting our intended payload was a stressful endeavor indeed. Despite my concerns regarding the Talon's use and protests for something more straightforward, the powder bomb option nevertheless won out in the war of ideas. C-17H21N04, better known as Soul Healer's Talon, was said to be a most fitting ambrosia to the gods, creating within them an intense intoxication. Such glory, however, was not fit for mortal consumption. To them it was pleasure, yet to us, a great poison. Fitting, my comrades argued, that the heretic leader should die by it. A reminder that even their greatest demagogue was nothing before the might of our gods. Entering the heretic leader's decadent palace was a most difficult thing to plan for. Even with the gods on our side, we could not afford to be reckless. Small armies of armed guards waited in every corner of that cursed castle of crass non-compliance. Initially, the plan was for half of our unit to distract the soldiers with a small hostage situation outside while the other half went in for the kill. The heretic leader's chef apparently had made nest with a Temenin, and from their unholy union gave rise to a child bearing but one of our god's marks, and so we took her for ourselves. Our demands to him were simple: do as we say, and your spawn will be allowed to live amongst us. Fail, and she shall face the consequences of her heretical heritage. Such persuasion was thankfully enough to draw this chef onto the path of righteousness. Fortunately for us, the first half of our plan would ultimately prove unnecessary. High Priest Yelot himself was the one whom had passed on the information, gleaned, I'm sure, from his correspondence with the gods. It seemed that in their hubris, the heretics had laid out for us a proverbial welcome mat. Their heathen leader was to be receiving soon an important guest, and as a curious result would be calling off much of his defensive legion. A perfect opportunity to strike. "Are you yet prepared, Brother Riftik?" my comrade asked me, leaning forth from the back seat of our moving transport with excitement in his voice. Tequila and I had known each other since we were but hatchlings, both of us constantly pushing our counterparts to greater heights, from climbing the tallest trees to seeing who could fast the longest, and all the way into combat training. The two of us were as good of friends as they came. Smoothing over my nerve-ruffled feathers, I clicked affirmatively before turning around to face my dearly known crew. Okathi was his usual stoic self, more concerned with the gentle polishing of his hearth-flame rifle than anything going on around him, up to and including the obvious advances of spiritual warfare specialist Lika, who by this point was busying herself trying to obtain his attention. Under the usual circumstances, someone so vulnerable as Lika would never be allowed on a suicide mission like this. That being said, her uncanny talent for understanding and deceiving heretics made her a necessity for this task. Her elegant stride and lustrous feathers painted together the very picture of Temenine beauty, even after our surgical mutilation. This, supplemented with a cunning wit, allowed her to talk her way into or out of whatever situation she so desired. Perhaps it was for the better, then, that she selected Okathi in her quest for shallow gratification. The man possessed for our gods a single-minded zeal I myself could only pray to understand after death, making him far more difficult to distract than her usual targets. "Look well for the gods, everyone," I squawked merrily, awakening without delay the sleeping soldiers Gevik and Koru as I continued my squad leader speech. "Today for us shall be the final and most glorious of our lives. I hope you're all prepared, for today we deliver judgment once and for all to their blasphemous mortal master." Excited chirps and whistles rippled across our transport as each of my colleagues variously cheered to the heavens and prayed to our gods. Q, however, noticeably declined to participate, instead maintaining a gaze fixed upon the floor. His attitude throughout our journey was disconcerting, to say the least. And so, being the leader of our merry crew, I took it upon myself to speak with him. "Is something amiss, Q?" I asked, noting with interest the way he flinched upon hearing my words. "A feather's width from paradise? And yet here you are moping so morosely. Tell me, brother, whatever is it that's rattled you so?" For a moment, the youngest of our unit did not reply, maintaining his gaze firmly affixed to the floor with an expression I could only identify as fear. Are we sure this is that the gods desire?" he asked shakily, glancing up toward me before promptly shriveling away upon the linking of our gazes. "For us to die? Do they really want that?" "Q," I hummed softly, reaching out behind the driver's seat to place upon his shoulder a comforting claw. "Why are you so afraid? You know our gods are beyond this facade we call death, yes?" Again he hesitated, casting his gaze out the tinted window of our transport as though admiring the creation which surrounded us. "Of course, sir," he then murmured, returning attention to the briefcase settled betwixt his legs, the very same one containing our poisonous payload. Accepting for the moment our youngest member's naive lack of godly zeal, I returned my attention to our assigned driver, Nikis, and continued. "How many more heretic checkpoints must we contend with?" I asked, noting the bored expression painting our infiltration specialist's countenance as he slowly began easing our vehicle to a stop before a small blockade of military vehicles. "This is the last one," he grumbled, quickly silencing the others' chit-chat with a fearsome glare. "Remember, fellow acolytes, we are Zintrish Special Forces here on a Code Northeast. Emergency security detail, no time for inspections. Understood?" No sooner had the sum of our unit voiced their understanding than was the door flung open by Nikis as he promptly paraded the building security towards us. 2 minutes of brief conversation and a small sprinkle of sweet talk from Lika later, we were walking through the Blasphemer's Garden on approach to an auxiliary gateway. Waiting patiently for Koru to work his gods-given talent upon the wrought iron gate's trio of complicated locks, I once again returned my attention to the fellowship of followers around me. "I will lead us in prayer while we wait," I began, folding both claws around my heart in reverence and watching as my allies did the same. "Hearth Sage, Soul Healer, Elder Scribe, gods of equivalent greatness and renown." Clink, resounded the first padlock, falling to the ground with a clatter of reverence to the gods. "Today we honor your names and carry out your judgment against the evils of the non-believers." Clack, please guide us in this final line of our living hymns so that we may molt our mortal plumage and join you amongst the stars for all eternity. Clunk. Finally, as the last lock fell, I concluded our prayer with the usual worshippers' haiku, and stepping forth toward Koru nudged open the gate before finally stepping forth into the courtyard's back area. "It's finally happening," Tequil chirped excitedly, joining alongside me as our band of merry sacrifices approached a back door set against the decadent den's wall. Unlike Q, my best friend held in his heart no hesitation for our divine task. "I cannot wait to meet the gods," he continued with tears of joy slipping down his face. As per usual, Okathi had little to say, sparing us not a single idle word as he stalked up to the door and rapped his claws thrice against it, signaling to the chef inside that those worthy of existence have arrived. "Got the lights, Gevik?" I asked, watching as my comrade picked open a nearby junction box and haphazardly took to cutting its wires, darkening the windows high above us as Goldnest's power cut out, retaking from these heretics the stolen light of Hearth Sage. Moments later, the entrance before us creaked open, as peeking through came the terrified eyes of our host, no doubt contemplating now how best to frame his sins before the god's judgment. You, he stammered fretfully, casting open the door defending him and allowing us inside without a mote's resistance. "Where is the heretic Salcom?" Gevik growled, shoving the chef down onto the ground and placing a claw onto his throat. He's in the dining room, with his guest," our contact whimpered, sighing in relief as my subordinate promptly lifted off his foot. "Now please, I've done all you asked. Just let me and my daughter go." "Your daughter will be fine. You have my word about that." I cooed gently, angling my rifle down toward his prone form. "You, however..." Momentarily squeezing down upon the trigger, I hummed with satisfaction as a bullet rocked into the heretic's cranium, silencing the blasphemer once and for all. Nary another word rose up between my allies as Q set down the briefcase and meticulously took to unlatching it, retrieving from within, after a ponderous period, one small cylindrical canister of Talon, and handing it obediently to myself. Stalking toward the dining room door and wrapping my free claw around its handle, I shivered with excitement as from behind this obstruction came a voice I recognized from our video briefing, the voice of the heretic leader. Carefully easing open the door and cringing upon its loud groan of complaint, I chuckled to myself as finally Salkim's sinful silhouette fell into view. "Ah, Thrick," he called out, referring to me by his former chef's name in utter ignorance of the end soon to befall him. "I was wondering where you—" Unwilling to further entertain this comic facade, I trilled happily to myself as my claw flicked off the canister's pin and slitted it across the floor, stopping just short of the Prime Minister's seat. It was done. Within my mind's eye, I was already sitting at the gods' table, accepting their words of approval like the greatest of trophies. However, in my own hubris, I had unfortunately failed to scan the mortal room before my toss. After all, what was a few more dead heretics in the grand scheme of our plan? A bonus, that's what. I was a fool. Though at first I had assumed my eyes to be deceiving me, soon it became clear that the shadowy figure darting toward my grenade was no illusion. I watched first in confusion as this stranger curled their form around the canister, waiting there on the floor, until finally the weapon detonated with a pop, sending into the figure's face a puff of Talon drastically hindered by its body's obstruction. How unfortunate, I thought at first, surveying the figure's motionless body. Frustrating as it was that our display's meaning had fallen flat as a result of this sacrifice. One suicidal stranger would hardly be enough to save Salkim from a hail of bullets after all. Then the stranger stood once more,